Hello, Jeff.
Well, howdy.
Well, Gamehole Con was quite a wonderful thing, and I was wandering around. And as I was wandering through the booths, I saw this Chaosium uh, the spread. We had Call of Cthulhu, but then there's also this beautiful spread of Runequest books. Beautiful, 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 beautiful RuneQuest books. And then I see that your name is on these RuneQuest books.
Yes, indeed.
So I do know because we have Greg Stafford and Steve Perrin. So I had Steve Perrin on earlier this year. And so it sounds like he was in charge initially early on back in the would have been like late 70s, early 80s of doing mechanics. But it's evolved since then. It's changed since then. There's stuff that's been added. So what has been your history and your role with RuneQuest?
Well, I got brought, well, two parts. I started as a fan, of course. RuneQuest was the game. I started role playing in the late 70s, early 80s, and initially this was out in California in the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of the neighbor kids had an older brother who had the original white box set, and so we stole it from the older brother and tried to play a game out of it. You know, we had miniatures, we bought miniatures, we knew there was something cool going on here. We tried to read the rules. We had no idea what we were supposed to do. So it basically turned around into a bunch of kids playing the equivalent of Play School or Legos with the miniatures and telling stories about the cool stuff we did, which at a certain level was right. That actually is what we were supposed to do. We just couldn't figure it out with the game system. And it wasn't until someone picked up Jim Ward's Metamorphosis Alpha that we actually figured out how the rules should work. So like everybody, we started playing
Well,
D&D.
wait a minute. That's interesting. So the Rosetta Stone was Metamorphosis Alpha.
Absolutely. Actually, that was the first one. And it was the first one where it was the first game where there was something. It was not simply you're playing a bunch of figures, you know, taken out of a war game, being thrown onto a board. There's something else going on, some sort of big mystery and big story that you're exploring, and it's tied in instead of it being and again, I'm not trying to be too derogatory, but instead of it being kind of boiled down Tolkien pastiche, it, you know, Metamorphosis Alpha was this avant-garde 1960s, 1970s generation ship science fiction. I mean, you got to remember, in the context of its time, it was out there, and it was like, oh, okay, this is how the rules work. We had rules that interacted with the weird stuff going on in the setting that you wouldn't be able to make up if you were treating this just as a hey, this is kind of amped up play school figures going around doing stuff. And so yeah, it was kind of the Rosetta Stone. After that, then we were able to figure out D&D, and then gaming in beginning of high school. You know, we had hit all the classic D&D modules of first edition, you know, White Plume Mountain and Expedition of the Barrier Peaks, which in the time was mind-boggling awesome. And it started petering down. And then a friend of mine brought in this game. He said, Jeff, I got this new game, and it's based on that board game we played last year, White Bear Red Moon, Dragon Pass. And hey, you can play anything you want. You can play a troll. Heck, you can play a werepig. How cool is that? And you know, so we started playing RuneQuest, and after that, you know, and this is the early 80s. After that, basically, RuneQuest became the default game for me for the last, gosh, well, if it's the early 80s, last 40 years. And it just started in as a fan and a player and then a GM. And then later I met Greg, and Greg and I started writing together in the 1990s. And Greg was working on a novel, and I was helping him out, being basically a sounding board. And at some point, The writing tasks began to switch, where I was doing an awful lot of the world development, and Greg was being more of a sounding board for me. And we ended up Greg turning over the keys to his Glorantha setting to myself and Rick Meintz. At the time, we had a little company called Boom Design. And then one thing turned to another. And when in 2015, we had Greg and Sandy asked us to come in and bail out Call of Cthulhu and Chaosium and take over the management and ownership of Chaosium. We realized at that point, well, what we need to do, we need to make sure that there is a new edition of RuneQuest that is very much the version that Greg wanted it to be. And then I took the lead role on that. We brought Steve back in and got Steve Perrin was involved in this, got a ton of feedback from Sandy. And of course, Greg and I, we'd been writing together for over 20 years. So Greg was and Greg gave me all of his notes and all of his never published editions of everything. And all of that put together, and we brought in Ken Rolston, now who we all affectionately call Uncle Ken. Ken Rolston, if you guys, I don't know if you remember the name.
No, I don't.
Ken goes way back to the early years of Dragon Magazine, and then for a while he was the line editor, the manager for RuneQuest when it was being published by Avalon Hill, and then he jumped on to bigger and better things and ended up being the lead designer for a little game called Morrowind. And
and too bad that never panned out for him.
Exactly, never. And actually, Morrowind and the entire Elder Scrolls series initially it was very much an homage to RuneQuest. So there's a lot of that built into it. And so, taking a long story, around 20, I think we came out with the new RuneQuest in 2018, and somehow at that point I found myself being Mr. RuneQuest, especially after Greg passed away, and then this year Steve passed away. So the torch got passed on to another generation, and that seems to be my job now, which there could be worse jobs in the world.
There could be much worse jobs. Yeah, because flipping through the books, and also seeing some stuff online has been posted. I'm gonna say investment, even though that's not a good word, but I'll say it because it's the money that had to be put into the artwork. You've kind of taken, I think, you made a unique look for RuneQuest.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's not comic booky, but it's kind of both fits in with, I think, the art or iconography or whatever of maybe seems like Indian temples and places like that. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of what you would see from real world mythology and how it was represented, to kind of also modernizing it with beautiful colors.
Yes. Well, although keep in mind that in the ancient world was far more colorful than we like to think about. We have this assumption that the past, we have basically two color palettes when we think about the past. We either have the generic medieval fantasy, everything's covered in mud and shit, color palette.
Yeah.
Or we have the BBC I Claudius production of ancient world with all these beautiful white marble statues. And in the ancient world they painted everything as garishly as possible. It looked more like the temples in the ancient world looked more like their color palettes probably resembled more the graffiti you would see on a wall in a barrio in Mexico City than anything that we normally would associate pop culture wise with the past. And so what we went with RuneQuest we went very in the art. We wanted to bring that color and vibrancy to the art, and also Runequest and Glorantha is it's very much rooted in ancient world, real world mythology. In the ancient Indian temples is a uh, uh, Tibetan stupas. Greg, about 20 years back, Greg was lucky enough to go on to go to Catalhoyuk in Turkey and go to a number of these really ancient Neolithic ruins. So a lot of that, but it's also American. There's a lot of the geography and the color palettes of the American West and the American Southwest in Glorantha, and we also wanted to bring that to it. So you see, you've got a lot of mesas and terrain and some of those pieces that look like could be the coastal range in California, or the Sierra Nevadas, or the Great Basin in Nevada, and all of that was really important to capture in the art. And I think we pretty much well succeeded on it. It certainly, we wanted it not to look like any other fantasy out there.
Yeah, and you did it well. And I think the idea is it's also consistent, even though there may be some that are more like flat, but the colors and everything all pulls it together in a unified way.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that and it's also we use more. I think almost. I'm trying to think. Do we have any Yes, we have. Most of our artists are European. We have of our primary artists, I think only Mark Smiley and Michelle Lockamy are American. Most of them are from France or Eastern Europe. So, Loic Mouzy, who also does a lot of work for Call of Cthulhu, Anna Orlova, Asi Hikala, who did that beautiful cover for the starter set. He's out of Finland. And then also some of my favorite pieces in the starter set is from a Southern Indian artist that we have who does absolutely amazing stuff. And of course, for him, he's coming in with this from a fantasy it comments. Oh, well, I'm just kind of drawing on Indian folklore, my own folklore for a lot of the pieces there, which I love. I mean, I mythology is a worldwide thing, and it's something that is so rich and so diverse that I find it inexplicable that in fantasy gaming we normally draw on, to the extent we draw on anything, we draw on either a cleaned up version of medieval England or half remembered Bullfinch's mythology.
Exactly. And I think what you, at least visually, in doing just a little bit of reading, is you're kind of combining both the familiar with the stuff that's not familiar. So you kind of have that combination where it's something that is kind of evocative and is I don't want to say there's probably improper words, but it's enticing because it's different from ours, and it draws us in, and we think differently about it. Because in some ways, I think the gods shouldn't be thinking like we think. They shouldn't be acting like we act.
They're immortal. They're eternal.
Yeah.
They're not just it's if you want to have the divine or spirits be a real thing in your game, in your fantasy, in your books you're setting, to me it's so the idea that they're just really powerful ordinary people is, to me, very boring and unfulfilling. As much as I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe and their movies, I mean, Thor and Loki they're just superheroes,
Right.
and so that doesn't raise any interesting questions about what is the relationship between people and the other world, the spirits, the gods, the cosmos itself. And these are questions that, you know, we as human beings have been asking in one form or another for you know, longer than recorded history. And it's a ripe subject for playing around with. In you know, what better place to play around with these sorts of questions than in a fantasy RPG?
Yeah, and I think, religion, even if people didn't fully believe in the power of the deities or whatever, still the holidays, certain rites, celebrations, they were all steeped into that, maybe given of alms, whatever it may be. But it just seems like, you know, that religion in a lot of ways is just kind of is, even though it's kind of expressly out there as far as we have clerics, but it's so sterile that there practically really is no religion.
Oh yeah, I would say in most modern fantasy there is none. It's as dry, it's as dry and sterile as our own modern age. You know, we and one of the things Greg always impressed on me is that human beings we like to pride ourselves on being rationalist, materialist, logical thinkers, but we're not.
No.
We think in terms of stories, and that these stories, these little narratives that we put together, that's the backbone on which we try to understand the world. And mythology is, you know, very much the core of how do we really try to put together and understand all of the things around us, not just our narrow specialized interest. You know, we can maintain a degree of objective clarity on a particular field that we really know a whole lot, and then we, for the rest, the other 95% of our life, we go back onto our mythology. And you know, and that's not a criticism of anybody.
No.
It's just how we human beings operate. And it's always strikes me that fantasy rarely plays around with that. And I think maybe that even goes back to Tolkien, who actually, if you know, you think about Lord of the Rings, there isn't a lot of religion at
No.
all there. It's very, you know, just not present. Now, Moorcock is something of, you know, a response that there are the gods of chaos, the gods of law involved in it, but they're all just such complete dicks that, you know,
They
they
all
don't.
are right. 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 Neither one is good. Law or
Exactly.
chaos.
Exactly. And, you know, I think you got to get to someone, you know, maybe Zelazny, you know, Lords of Light plays around with, uh, uh, you know, quite a few religious themes in it. If you know, if you're listening to this and you're unfamiliar with Zelazny's Lord of Light, pick it up. One of the great sci-fi fantasy crossovers of all time.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. I wonder if it's on audiobook. I'm going on vacation. That might be a good opportunity to do an audible.
I would hope it's on it. It's in my opinion, it's far better than the Amber series. But you know, you look at fantasy, and it is often very whitewashed when it comes to these sorts of issues. I think, other than Zelazny, I think Gene Wolfe, in his Soldier of Mist series, plays around with it. You know, how do people actually think about the world and try to understand it? But yeah, it's an area that we have a curious blind spot for, and Runequest lets us explore that, and it lets us explore something that is at a certain point unfamiliar, but then we get into it and it's very familiar, because all of these mythological archetypes, we still recognize them all. They're all lurking in the background.
Well, I
I
think
mean,
it's
maybe I'm
Oh, I think what's interesting too, correct me if I'm wrong, because my reading's just been superficial, but is there like five sets of I don't want to say is icons, but of runes that you have association with, and those five, each one of those is a pair for your character?
Yes, we have. So when you make a RuneQuest character, everybody picks, you pick a couple of elemental runes that you're strong in. You know, air. These are the classic elements, more or less: air, fire, water, earth, but also darkness and the moon. But then you have a set of opposed runes, polarities. So change, stasis, life, death, and you basically pick your ratings in these, and these define not only your character's personality, but at a certain level your character's your character's magic, what gods your character is likely to be able to connect with, and you can use them to um, you know, kind of get a little bonus on certain skills that are
Related to that rune.
simpatico to those. Exactly. So it's a way of basically making your character's psychology matter in the game.
But it also ties in with the mythology too.
Very much so.
So
Well,
that's
but if you think about it, you know, I again, if you're familiar all with Carl Jung, uh, it's only a hop, skip, and a jump from Carl Jung to Joseph Campbell, uh,
right.
to mythology. That the relationship between psychology and mythology, you know, that is a very permeable border. And so in RuneQuest, we really try to play with that. That, you know, your character's psychology is going to get tied into the mythology of the setting.
And yes, and I think what then it also ties you in with the, you know, by mythology, just even also with the religion, also
Yeah,
by extension. And so then it all fits in. Everybody's quote unquote religious to some
yeah.
degree.
In so in RuneQuest, um, to deny the relevance or existence of gods and spirits would be asinine,
Right.
because they, you know, it's a flat world.
Yes, exactly.
It's an empirically flat world. We can sit there, we can do I can't remember the name of the Greek scholar who did the experiment to show the curvature of the earth through math.
Oh,
Uh
there was the librarian who measured the world. I forget, he was in like Alexandria,
yep.
and he had the king give him these boys who were trained to have a set pace, and he measured from one location to a well, because one time during the year the sun shone directly down, and he calculated within like 200 miles the
Yep.
circumference of the
That,
earth.
yeah. Well, so you do that same experiment in Glorantha, and what you're going to come out with is it's flat. And um, and that the world really is as we imagined it in the ancient world. And you know, once you make that hop, well, of course everybody is religious in their own way, because it's it to uh I you know, we have a running joke, some of the writers, that somewhere in Glorantha there's a bunch of overeducated scholars that have formed a secret round earth society, you know.
That's funny.
and and you know, scribble justifications for, oh well, really the world is round, I'm sure of it. But of course, in the setting, it's a flat earth. There is a physical underworld. You can, you know, you go to the underworld when you die, but you can also go there as a character and go on adventures like Odysseus did, and go into the underworld and, hey, you know, hang out and meet your former compatriots that died in battle or died in an adventure gone horribly wrong. Uh,
Yeah, and I think what's also because that a guy I know was wanting to do a Bronze Age game. This is before I read RuneQuest, and I said, you know, one of the things I think you need to do is just take the worldview that the worldview of the ancients was the right worldview,
yes.
not our modern understanding of the world. And then when I was reading through Runequest I was flipping through is talking about diseases, and it explicitly states that diseases are not caused by bacteria.
Right.
It's
Oh,
like it's spirits and miasma. It's not the sort of microbes. That's ridiculous.
yeah, well, exactly. What the heck is a microbe? Well, and this is one of the things that's wonderful about role-playing games, is it allows us to get out of our environment and try to put ourselves in the worldview of somebody not us.
Yeah.
Somebody from the ancient past, somebody of a different culture, of a different society, of a different species. And it allows us in a entertaining manner with our friends, and with hopefully with some fun, exciting gaming activities. It also allows us to open our mind and explore different ways of looking at the world, and I think that's an incredibly valuable activity. Not to get too much on a soapbox, but I think that being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes or sandals, or bare feet for that matter, is an incredibly a valuable activity.
Right.
Especially in this world where we spend entirely too much of our time now, especially in the last 2 years, we spend ourselves very much in our own, technological bubble, where we definitely filter information coming into us, because that's probably what most of us do for our job, and given the biggest way that we have to socialize right now, is often also remotely, that the exercise that we have in any role-playing game of trying to imagine ourselves outside of our own box, I think is incredibly valuable and rewarding. And so
Yeah.
with
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think those have been, as far as my experience. I know some people just enjoy just going and hacking stuff, but I think some of the most enjoyable things I've done, especially at game conventions, when there's where you can try these different kinds of games, is to actually you know push that and think through those types of things.
Yeah. Oh, and there's nothing wrong with some hack and slash. I'm
No.
running a game. I'm running a game for my 12-year-old son and my 9-year-old daughter and some of their friends. All right. What is most of the adventure about? Yeah, it's that there are bad guys, they fight it. But I'll also get these interesting dialogues where, my daughter will say, "Well, I wouldn't do this, even if it makes sense, because I'm an elf. That's not how I think of the world."
Right.
And that's the getting yourself out of yourself and trying to imagine the world from a different perspective. And you think about that. What other chances do we get to do that? Yeah.
Yeah, because everything that we do for the most part is consumption rather than us actively engaging.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's the other thing that's wonderful about role-playing games, board games to a lesser extent, but in a role-playing game, it's one of our few leisure activities where we get a group of friends or associates together and we actively create something. I guess we could go back and build a barn and raise a barn all together, the old barn
Yeah,
raising
yeah.
holidays. But that's a lot of work, whereas a role-playing
And not everybody wants a barn.
I'd love to have a barn, but I really don't have the space for it. But you see what I mean,
Oh
is
yeah.
that it's and I think an awful lot of the time, we as gamers, we understate and underappreciate how remarkable gaming is. Yes, it's a fun, entertaining thing that we do. Hey, it's a great way to spend 3 or 4 hours with friends. But it's also got all of this other really remarkable activities going on. You know, you're actively imagining the world through different eyes. You may be creating an entirely new world with a whole set of different rules and customs and cultural expectations. And we're also actively creating something with our friends collectively. You know,
Yeah,
that's
and I think the thing too is in kind of, even though I'm no expert on improv at all, but in some ways you are, there's kind of a certain set of rules, but you're also reacting what other people are doing. And so there's a lot of like understanding what they're doing and trying to do your responses based on what they're doing. And that's what I think is also kind of interesting too, as far as kind of being, I don't want to say empathetic, but there is a certain amount of that goes on too.
oh yeah, it's Ken Rolston, who was uh, a long history with Runequest. Used to be the line manager for it when it was being run by Avalon Hill. I think I mentioned his name earlier. Ken described to me role-playing games are interactive improvisational radio theater.
Yes. And where
So
everybody who's playing can break character and laugh, and it's okay.
yep, yep.
Oop. Yeah, sorry about that. Just a second. I better text my wife. My mom was just calling, so, and she's in a what time is it? She's in a mom. So she's I'm supposed to take her out for ice cream here, some biscuits and gravy. So she's all excited about that. So, like,
well, and kind of continuing, because I think if I remember the theme of this is just ramble.
It is.
And rambling along this lines, if you look at all of the Chaosium games, this focus on the psychology of the character, of the player character, is really key to all of our major lines. You know, in Call of Cthulhu, you've got your character, but the with the usual hit points and how many bullets do I have, blah 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 blah. But the stat that everybody cares about all the time is, am I losing sanity?
Right.
I was just running Masks of Nyarlathotep last night for my wife and some of our neighbors, but it'll be a long game. We'll be running for years. This will be the third time I've done Masks over the many years that campaign's been out. But we had it where one of the characters sees a dead body in an unexpected place, and is horrified, and the character loses some sanity, and the player is like, oh god, I'm already losing sanity. I'm gonna have to, I've got to figure out how much I want to expose my character, not to the risks of being shot at or whatnot, but to the dangers of getting sucked in too deep into the mystery, because I'm gonna go insane if I do. So you've got this constant concern about your psychological well-being in Cthulhu, and then you go to Runequest or Pendragon, and you have your character's psychology or personality interacts directly with the setting. In Runequest, it's with the runes and the various passions. With Pendragon, it's with the personality traits and passions, and there's they're not just a negative game mechanic where the GM can periodically hit you on the head and say your character wouldn't do this, or they've got a big positive aspect to them. So you get in these games, you get characters often, players often role playing up some of the less useful parts of their personality because they get bonuses for doing that. It's easier for them to do tasks, skills and activities that are in sync with what they've said their character's personality is. So they play it up because it's something that gets them mechanical advantage. And so they're using these the rules to interact with their character's psychology, which also interacts with the setting that the characters are operating in. And it's something I've always loved about Pendragon, and it's something we were really happy that we managed to port into to Runequest. I mean, it's I don't know if you ever played GURPS.
No, I was a
But those
hero system person myself.
Okay, it had the same thing, that the
Oh, yes.
advantages, so you would take disadvantages, and disadvantages actually were the only interesting thing about your character in most systems.
Yes.
But of course you bought these disadvantages and you really didn't want to trigger the disadvantages.
Right.
Because they were interesting things about your character, but there was nothing that the only real gain you got from the existence of that disadvantage is you got more points so you could buy, additional skills or advantages. So you didn't use these flaws about your character or limitations about your character to run wild with your character, because you were at a certain level mechanically you were disencouraged from using your disadvantages.
Well, I think right. I think and what it also does is it requires then, since you are not incentivized to use it, it requires the GM be required, and you've got 4 or 5 people playing, each with 4 or 5 disadvantages. Unless you pre-write scenarios for those, that's just too much cognitive load for a GM to do. What
Absolutely.
You really need, yeah.
And absolutely, and then people get upset because what the GM usually remembers is, I remember Claudia, her character has her character has a cocaine addiction. I'm going to hit her with a stick, and I should be doing that for everybody. But the only one I can actually remember on the fly is this one, and then you get a feel that well, that's unfair. The GM's telling me how I should be playing my character, and Greg came up with a way of, well, let's incentivize the players to play up their personality traits. If I've said my character is fanatically brave, well, let's incentivize them to actually be fanatically brave. And if they act cowardly, their brave is going to go down. They can choose to behave in a different manner, but that cool Benny that they've gotten is gonna start going down. And what you find is players, players are now incentivized to role play their character, and so they role play it wildly. They're like those old experiments from the 60s with the rhesus monkeys, taking the pellets that have cocaine in it, and sorry, we're running Call of Cthulhu, so I'm afraid I've been, player characters with drug abuse problems seem to be a running theme here. But that mechanically incentivizing the player to do what they've already said they want their character to do is, one of the great game design things that Greg Stafford came up with in the 1980s, and it's something I absolutely love in a game. And now when I play game systems that there isn't that, I feel curiously incomplete with my characters.
Right. And I think you also load up characters with, this might be the wrong term, but like loves and hates.
Yes. Yeah, because isn't that what drives us?
Yeah, it's like, I hate the Lunar Empire, but I love this. But all of a sudden, well, what if somebody from the Lunar Empire is part of your party and you need to trust them? It's just like then you're in conflict, and it's
and conflict creates stories.
Oh yes,
and my favorite characters are characters that have passions that they care strongly about that are at a certain point diametrically opposed. People that are internally in conflict are great characters.
I agree.
I am loyal to Argrath Whitebull, fanatically loyal to him. I hate the Lunar Empire as much as I'm loyal to Argrath Whitebull. And what do I do when Argrath Whitebull makes a truce with
Yes.
the Litter Empire? Or says that
Do
this,
you go Orwell on this 1984?
yeah,
I've
yeah.
always loved the Lunar Empire.
and start developing a little twitch that comes up from time to time. Who was the Inspector Clouseau's boss in the old Pink
Oh,
Panther
I don't
movies?
remember. That's so classic. Yes.
And this is to me, this is the joy of the mechanical systems that Greg and Steve and Sandy as well, all brought into Chaosium, and you combine it with settings like Glorantha and Runequest. And for me, I've been actively gaming in their settings now for far longer than I want to imagine, and it's never grown stale, which is also something. I can always go back to RuneQuest, I can always go back to Pendragon, I can always go back to Call of Cthulhu. And I'm not sure that I can say that about a lot of rule systems and mechanics. I can play it and I can enjoy it, and I go through it and I'm done with it. I don't want to revisit that for 20 years until I've forgotten all the things that I didn't enjoy about it.
Yeah, and we played Delta Green, which is kind of I guess a stripped down version of Call of Cthulhu.
Yep.
And I think what was interesting is that with those mechanics, with the sanity or whatever it's called, mechanics, is a lot of times it puts characters in very uncomfortable situations. It's like you got to deal with it. You got to do a thing, and it's the right thing to do, but you also know it's going to erode your character.
Yep.
And you also know sometimes the players have characters that you got to take care of. Like there's one person who got compromised. I call the handler, and they're like, you got to put him down. Like, oh, hey, Jimmy, come here. It's like, it didn't make me feel good, but it was part of the story and everybody understood that. It wasn't like but that's just the nature of the game, where I think it forces us into situations that are very interesting, even if a bit uncomfortable, but not in a way that's like disturbing, in a way that's really disturbing. It's like,
well, exactly. The point of putting yourself into creative different situations isn't for you to, it's for you to think about the world a little bit differently. It's not for you to get, psychologically abused. Yeah, that's because at the end of the day, it's a fun game. You want this.
right. What was the narrative that came out of this? It's a fun narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, it's even if at the time there can be elements of it you're like going, oh God, but there's at the end of it, it's always got, gaming should always be an activity where everybody playing the game, running the game, they're all having fundamentally a good time, and afterwards they are all, hey, this was fun, I enjoyed myself. So you can be in an uncomfortable situation because that's part of dramatic tension,
Right.
but don't be stupid about it.
Exactly. So when you guys came up with a new edition, you also are dealing with, I think you're in a very similar situation with a lot of the I'll call them legacy games. I'm not sure if that's the term, but game systems have been around for a while. I guess the question would be: is there things that you're still tied to that you wish you could have let go, that you have to kind of, in a way, keep because of I don't want to say backwards compatibility, but I guess backwards compatibility?
Well, we made very early on the decision that we would build the new edition of Runequest off the rules mechanics of the second edition of Runequest, which was that was the very most successful edition of Runequest, and it meant that people, if you get into the new edition, And as long as that new edition is mostly compatible with the old edition, you've got this huge library of old material that you can play with relatively little work as the GM. And then we built out new mechanics from that starting point. So the way that the runes work, the passions, etc. That's all new, but that's stuff that largely is player character focused. You know, NPCs have that, but from a GM's point of view, you can hand wave that. It's pretty easy to backwards port that. It's way more player character focused on the player character, you know, the player being able to really run with their character. And NPCs, you can build that on, but you can just, you know, do what GMs have done forever, which is hand wave.
Right. But there was nothing like systematically, like it seems to me like fifth edition, there's probably a lot of things that should have just gone away. Like I think, for instance, like having stats, that just makes no sense. In the way
well, what do you mean? Like a strength con?
yeah, like all that matters is the bonus. Nothing else matters. Whether you have a strength of 13, it's like, why do you even have a strength at that point? Maybe you initially roll to see what your bonuses are, but it just seems like there's so much that's kind of tied away. It's like, this is legacy that no longer is needed, and we're just doing it because that's the way it's always been. And you can't really get away from changing, or people will just like lose their minds.
Well, yeah, and so if I was in the position, which I'm not, if I was in the position of designing a new D&D, one of the questions would be, how much backwards compatibility do I want? And you know, it's way more difficult with D&D because every major edition is in many ways radically different. You know, okay, first and second, there wasn't that much of a radical departure, but there's a huge change between second and third.
Right.
There's a huge change between third and fourth. There's a huge change between fourth and fifth. And I grabbed fifth. I wanted to run for my kids. I pulled out my old G1 through 3. See, I love it. You know what I'm talking about. And you can't. You know, there's too much. You can do it, you know, but there's a lot of work to do that. They're not really backwards compatible.
No, there's different sensibilities about the whole thing. In fact, I remember somebody even, I thought that was kind of neat on Wizards Wobbly's podcast, the way he compares different systems is looking at the ogre.
Yeah.
So what's the ogre in 5th edition? What's the ogre in Advanced D&D? What it was like in BX. And it's just like, that was his, you know, way of comparison. And they're vastly different.
Yes. I mean, you have to look at, so there's kind of two different models you can have for these games that you know, were created in the 70s and 80s and are still popular today. You can take there's the D&D route, which is every 5 to 7 years, we reinvent the game. We go in, you know, you think about it, it's kind of the game workshop model for Warhammer 40K.
But there's a skeleton that they never change. And I think that's where some of the fundamental flaws are they can't get away from.
Yeah, but at a certain point, if you're going to brand something, so for them, it's a branding exercise.
Right.
You know, if you're going to brand something as D&D, what are those core things?
Yes, exactly.
To be able to call it D&D. If we're going to change it, we're going to make dramatic changes. Now, our approach to new editions at Chaosium, our Uncle Ken calls it the 85-15 rule. And that is, when you come up with a new edition, you keep at least 85% of the previous edition. Right? Because that way, and you look at it and you know, people that have invested money and they have invested time in the previous edition, you keep those parts of that previous edition, which is what they got sucked in for.
Right. And by investment, you're right. It's not just even just a monetary, but it's also the time and mental energy, and it's up in the hard drive. They got hard drive space in their brain allocated to knowing this, and then you've changed too much. You're like,
if you change too much, then they have to learn a new system. and people hate doing that because we don't have it. Well, and it's fair.
It
I don't
is.
have, I don't, you know, when I was in my teens and early 20s, I loved learning new systems. Well, you know, I'm not anymore. I don't have that time. I don't have, you know, the learning a new edition of D&D is going to have to compete with, you know, trying to make sense of the new 2021 updates to the IRS tax code, so that I can fill up my taxes. Because, you know, hey kids, this is the stuff everybody has to do, and every year you get to learn a new system.
Right.
You know, and so it's not fun to have to radically relearn a system that if I've already invested in it.
Right. But the question is if you can make it smoother, run better, and be more accessible for the future.
Yes. And then it comes in, well, what does that mean? So with perfect 2020 hindsight, when I was working on the new edition of Runequest, I would have magically been aware that in 5 years, we would be putting everything in terms of character management and interaction in game that would be online. Right. So I would want to do something. I would want to create game mechanics that are as easy as possible to be able to have a online character creation, character management process.
Yes.
But that's perfect 2020 hindsight. You know, back in 2015, that was not, you know,
Right.
that was not the world we go into. But otherwise, the key. So when we changed the editions of RuneQuest, there were some elements from third edition that was like, you know, fatigue points are stupid. They're just an accounting exercise. Yes, there's some grognards that love to talk about it, but I've played with them, and even them, they tend to throw it out or forget about it.
Kind of like
So let's throw
encumbrance.
out. Encumbrance is fine as long as it's a hey, how much stuff can I carry? Okay, I can carry that much stuff.
Right.
Am I going to revisit my encumbrance? Only if I decide to suddenly completely, you know, change my stuff. And in RuneQuest, it's different than in D&D because your armor, your shields, and your specific weapons make a huge, that they don't make a marginal difference, they make a huge difference for you. So because in RuneQuest, your hit points pretty much will capped at what they started at. You know, they can go up a little bit. You can get magic that gets them to go up a little bit, but as your character progresses and develops, you more or less start, you know, maybe you get 3 or 4 new hit points during the, you know, as your character manages to get some of its stats up, but they don't change tremendously. So you become much more dependent upon, well, if I can't really change my physical body during the course of the game to somehow become indestructible, then the very least I can do is get better gear.
And yeah, to put stuff into like dodging, right, or whatever the
Put stuff into dodging. Get really you know, make sure that I keep my weapons, my shield, and my weapon in good repair because they get beat up real fast. And you know, I know you had another question, but this just kind of reminds me of a comment that when we were developing RQG, and I can't remember if it was Steve or Ken was commenting that Dungeons and Dragons is a game that is fundamentally it's an attritional game, right? You've got these pools of hit points,
yeah.
these pools of stuff, you know, potions or spells or whatnot, that when I'm going through my adventure, we attrit that down. And the question is does that attrition rate faster than my progression through the adventure? Now,
Right.
conceptually, RuneQuest, you don't have there's an element of attrition, but it better not be you because you don't have a lot of hit points. So when you start getting hit and start suffering damage, it's, you know, you get stabbed with a sword, it's going to hurt, and it's good chance your character is not going to continue after getting stabbed more than once or twice. So, but where you have attrition is on your gear, which is harder to deal with as you're, you're going on an adventure. So, I'm trying to think. You remember Excalibur, movies like Excalibur, or actually one of the best ones is, do you remember the movie Time Bandits?
Yeah.
Okay, you remember the fight scene between Sean Connery and the Minotaur?
No, I don't.
Okay, there's this great scene. Sean Connery plays Agamemnon, and he's fighting, or no, Theseus. He plays Theseus, and he's fighting the Minotaur, which is some English bodybuilder dude wearing a cow's head. It's classic time bandit stuff, and they're having this fight, and Sean Connery parries with his shield, and his shield gets smashed, and he has to throw it away. And that's one of the things that happens in Runequest combat that I love is you start losing your gear because it gets broken. It does its purpose. And then, you're in some awful place like Snakepipe Hollow. You just, you just lost your shield and some of your best stuff, and you cast all your big magic on what is not, because Runequest doesn't have bosses. It's just a fight there because you came in on something going on and decided that this had to be a fight, and here you are, and you got no idea how you're going to get out because we survived here and we defeated them, but oh shit, my shield's broken, my sword's bent. John over here has a sucking gut wound. Do we use it? Do we use the last of our rune points to heal John to get, so that John's up, or what do we do? And so it's not an attritional, you don't have an attrition burn. It's in Runequest, once you have that fight, everything might end up getting thrown out the window from your first fight. It forces the players to constantly think, is this worth it?
Right.
And I know we're rambling because there was originally a point and I've completely gone off.
Well, to me, the thing is, people who are old, well, maybe the grognards complain about 5th edition as being power gaming, but all D&D is power.
D&D was always a power. I have great fondness for D&D, but let's recognize what its limitations are hardwired into its D&D. The very, very beginning of D&D, you were playing the individual miniature from a miniature skirmish war game. Yeah. That's what you were doing. And your goal is for your miniature to survive. You went on those early, very, very early D&D adventures. It was like, I'm taking my miniature and we're going to go and do the Mines of Moria. And we're going to get really, I want to get my level up as fast as possible. I want to get, come on, we all remember from the artifacts section from the Dungeon Master's Guide. I want to get the cool artifacts so that I'm able, Wand of Orcus or whatever whatever cool unique magical artifact that player characters seem to have dripping over them at a certain point. And that was the game to a very large extent. There's nothing wrong with that. What I noticed with 5th edition is that the levels 1st through 5, which were, when I was playing D&D, those were always the sucky levels because somebody breathed on you wrong and your character died.
Right.
It gets you past that. So a 1st edition character in 5th edition is now surprisingly robust.
Oh yes.
And what we did kind of the same thing with Runequest. Your characters start out, the idea is, instead of having you start out as a 16-year-old kid right off the farm, you're starting as somebody in their 20s who has already likely fought in battles and has a past history, and we're starting in media res, and you're skilled enough that you're the first time you have a fight, you are probably skilled enough that if you handle it right, you're going to be able to, as long as you're not stupid, you're going to be able to survive the situation. You know, you might have to run away, but you're not this totally incompetent thing that has to run around and kill rats in order to build up your
Yeah,
skills.
that's insane, isn't it?
And
There's
that's
a guy in a
something
tavern. He's got rat problems in his basement. He's gonna hire you to go kill rats, and then you die killing rats.
But yes, it's the and this is something kind of going back to the original question here. That is something I think certainly D&D has done. We've done with Runequest, do with Pendragon, which is that one thing that I think a lot of people who play games, they have fond nostalgia for the Zero to Hero days, but they don't have the time for it. They want to.
Yeah, and well, I think the thing is there's a point where it's like, if you're sucky, your character sucks. There's a point where that's not fun.
Yeah,
you don't necessarily expect to be like, an elite person, but at least be a competent person.
Well, exactly. And the other bit is that gaming time, and I don't know how it is for you, but gaming time is precious time for at our household. We game. We right now have 3 games a week, which is really a lot. Hey man, I'm a professional. 2 of them are Chaosium house games. One is a game I run for my wife and some of our neighbors. So it's hard to schedule that, and for the people coming in, everybody, we're all working. We've got careers and professions. I'm lucky because I work in the gaming industry, so I can justify all of this as hey, Claudia, it's work time. I'm getting paid for this. But for most people, and even most people that are involved in the gaming industry, that luxury doesn't exist. So when you're designing a game, you want people to get to the fun stuff as quickly as possible. You don't want to have them have to play 6 or 7 sessions before they're even able to do the stuff that they came to the game for.
Right.
And getting back to that, I think that's something we did a really good job of with RuneQuest. I think that is one of the great strengths. I know grognards complain a lot about this, but I actually think that's one of the great strengths of fifth edition, is that you get to the game real quick.
Yeah, and I think most people, when they D&D, I think the acceleration to 3rd level it's a pretty quick step to get to 3rd level, and I think they determined that's where the sweet spot where starting out really is about 3rd level.
Yeah. I mean, the only question I have is, why not just start there?
Yes.
So what we did in RuneQuest, there is an argument, again, kind of rambling about game design theories, is one of the big issues when you play a game is you need time to pick up the game itself, not just to understand the rules, but how do these rules actually interact with me? What parts of them matter in the particular game that I'm playing with these people? And how do I get to know my character and how my character is supposed to interact with the stuff going on? And a computer game designer friend of mine, David Dunham, who did the King of Dragon Pass games, calls this the lost first session problem. And his thesis was basically the first session of every game that you play, every campaign you play, is basically lost. Right? Because all you're doing in that is your learning system, learning your character.
Right.
So that you know, in RuneQuest, what we try to do that, we've got that character, we try to address that through the character generation process, where you kind of go through this mini game to figure out what your character has done in their, you know, what's gone on in my life so far. Hey, what did my, who were my parents, who were my grandparents, and in that little mini game that you play through, you learn key tropes and key factions, and you start identifying yourself one way or another with some of these things, so you're hitting the game running. D&D does this by having a, hey, there's a first level. The first level, you're going to kind of learn how things work, and you're going to learn what your stuff is, but don't worry, 3 sessions in,
I would say the backgrounds for those, where I think are kind of quaint, it really doesn't offer much compared to what I noticed with the RuneQuest. I mean, the downside, it's just going to take a lot longer to do the RuneQuest, but I think if I recall correctly, you have like a grandparent. It's either the grandmother or the grandfather who's a key individual, and then you have a parent. It could be the mother or the father that's a key individual.
And you pick it. Yep, you pick who are the people in your you know, which was your grandparents is the one that casts the biggest legacy on you dramatically.
Yeah.
Which of your parents is the one that casts the biggest legacy on you?
So if you're playing in an area that's, you know, your family's been, that can tie in. Oh, you're the grandson of, you know, Mattia, whatever, who, you know, which I think is very interesting, and it does, I think, in a way. I don't know if it'll ever cause players to actually read. I'm dubious, but it could actually get them to read a little bit of the background, because there's a lot of background, but it focuses just on something very specific.
Yeah, and because it's a, you know, we call it a we call it a mini game, but in some ways it's almost a choose your adventure game, right? You go through and you do this. You come in and you start knowing the big factions, and you start having connections with other player characters and other NPCs in the setting, and you haven't had to read anything. Right. We've tricked you by having you play through all of that, and you know, that's a mechanic that the first game that really played around with that was the original Traveler, which played around with that, and in all fairness, when I was playing Traveler, that was my favorite part about the game, was actually the character creation.
Actually, it made me angry. Like, why do I have Vaxsuit 2? Like, my only skill is Vaxsuit 2. Why?
So I loved it because you started getting all these stories in your mind of your character. What you mechanically got for it usually was
a Vaxsuit 2.
It was Vaxsuit 2. But you at least, you came in, it's like, oh, I've got this background. I kind of know who my character is. And then Greg came out with a game called Pendragon, which is still, in my opinion, you know, we're coming out with a new edition of that next year. But in my opinion, Pendragon is one of the greatest games of all time. And one of the things that was wonderful about it is you in character creation, you went through this family background that gave your character context within the setting. And I, you know, that way you could learn about the setting and not have to read, you know, a 200-page supplement.
Right.
And we took that and we turned it up to 11 for RuneQuest, and tried to make sure that every one of the things that's going on in that is something interesting, and helps tie your character even more strongly to something important in the setting. So, yeah, I like to think we did a really good job on that. And yeah, I've tried to do the D&D 5 backgrounds with my kids, and you know, this is something. And Mike Merles is a friend of mine, so Mike, you know my complaints about this. I couldn't figure it. I can't figure out where the darn background. You know, you go in, and this was another rule that Ken Rolston had on a. When we were designing RuneQuest, is if it's not on the character sheet, it's not important. Right? So if there's in a big area that says character background, more than one line, then your character background is not important for the system. So anything in a game that I can't immediately reference on my character sheet is clearly something that's not, most players are going to say, well, that's not important. That's just fluff. And so, when you're doing character design, if you want the background, if you want their personality, if you want you want passions or advantages or whatever to be important in your play, you've got to find a way that it's put onto the character sheet, and you've got to find a reason why the player will look at that when they're stumped.
Right. Well, or yeah, because if a person doesn't like one thing I did is I made a character who was I guess a rogue or a thief, but the background was acolyte.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was he was a criminal, a street guy, and then he got some religion. So really, he's trying to do the good thing, and he's really a person who's affiliated with a deity, but really he's just a very good thief. And those skills kind of unfortunately, he has to keep going back to that.
Just when I thought I got out, they pull me back in. Michael Corleone.
Well, not even that. It's just like maybe he's the one that figures, you know what? Nobody else can solve these problems. I'm given these gifts of doing these terrible things to help these people, like kind of like a Robin Hood sort of thing, but not necessarily Robin, but could be any sorts of things. But he's like the ones who's willing to get his hands dirty when the other people are unwilling to.
Yeah, and that's a great archetype.
Right. But the thing is, but that's just for me to play my character, but there's no mechanical reason, because I already got all my mechanical reasons. I got my skill, my 2 skills, I got my starting equipment, and that's it. So there's no reason for me to ever, unless I'm wanting to role play with that archetype, there's no reason for me to ever go back to that background.
Which is a problem, because what'll happen is, and you get grognard, and boy, I'm using the term grognard dismissively. I of course am a grognard. I've been around since forever, and you know what the term grognard means, right?
Yeah, it's one of Napoleon's old generals who would, I guess, get together and talk about.
It literally means grumbler.
Yeah,
complainer. Literally, that's what the term was. And if you were a member of the Imperial Guard, you were allowed, one of the privileges that you had as a soldier of the Imperial Guard is you could complain about things even in front of Napoleon, and you could say things and whine about stuff that would get a normal soldier thrown into jail. But because you had proven your worth, you were allowed to bitch and moan as much as you wanted.
Yeah, Russia's a bad idea, Napoleon. That was a bad idea.
yeah, this is stupid.
What were you thinking?
This is stupid. Well, I can get away with saying that because I've also fought with you for the last 15 years on every other stupid war you've had. But a lot of old time gamers go, well, role playing there doesn't need to be any mechanical support for role playing. That's just stuff you should do. But we've got mechanical support. It's like guardrails, right? It gives us something where you're aware that it exists, and even if we never have to rely on it, it's there, and it reminds us that, oh yeah, my character, I've got this background. I'm wanting to find, I've got religion and I care about this. But I've also got this criminal background that I can use, but also gets thrown back into my face all the time. And if it's something that has some meaning on your character sheet, then you're going to use it's again, I'm referencing Ken was an incredible resource, because Ken Rolston has forgotten more about game design than pretty much any current game designer knows. That didn't sound that good, but yeah. Point is, given his background in both the computer game industry and the tabletop industry, really it was an incredible resource. And one of the things he said is the purpose of the character sheet is that when I'm stuck in the game, I want to grab my character sheet and go, okay, what should I do? And that's the first thing I consult.
Yes.
And so what you're saying that it's important in my game that when I don't know what to do, I want to look and, hey, I've got this bravery rating. Maybe that's important. Maybe that's what I should do. Oh, I've got this rating here that says that I'm really strong in the illusion room. That means I lie a lot, right? And I make stuff up. Okay, it's there to provide a reminder for what I should be doing.
Well, I think the other thing too is the mechanics will create a feel for the game. So if you're running, we'll just take the genre of, we'll say the Cthulhu. You can run with different systems, and every system will generate a different feel.
Yes.
So if you were to use D&D mechanics versus Call of Cthulhu mechanics versus Gumshoe mechanics versus Fate versus whatever, it enforces a feel. And I think when you start putting mechanics in there to incentivizes, it ensures, I won't say ensures, but quote ensures that type of experience is created. It kind of creates rails for that experience.
Absolutely. So like if you look at all the BRP games, and BRP means basic role playing. So Cthulhu, Runequest, Pendragon, Stormbringer, yada, yada, yada. All of those, one of the key mechanical experiences is that your character is both reasonably competent at a lot of things, but also very fragile, right? When you're playing Call of Cthulhu, and people pull their guns out, how scared are you? Even if you're a really competent character.
One shotgun can ruin your day.
Yeah, one shot. Yeah, one bad shot, you're dead. And that's through. Now in RuneQuest, you're a little more robust, and you have magic, which allows you to do things that a Cthulhu character could never imagine. But at the same bit, even though you're probably a little bit more skilled than your Cthulhu counterpart, you possess magical resources, etc. Still, a bad one sword shot or arrow shot to the arrow, and you're an ex-adventurer.
Yeah.
And that's a constant. That's a feel that if I tried to run, and when I don't know if you ever played the I think it was a 3rd edition adaptation of Call of Cthulhu that we did.
The only one I've actually we officially played was whatever that white box with the mansion, 1930s. Is that the?
Oh yeah, but that was classic Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, that's the only. Other than that, I've only played in. I've only played either a variation of it or like the Delta Green, or I've played in a convention game. That's the only time I've ever played anything but classic.
Okay, so Delta Green is basically the same. It's pretty much the same mechanical structure. But if let's say we try to put the D&D system, well, in D&D, I'm not fragile.
Right.
And the other bit is that in D&D, I always get more robust as a character as I move forward in time.
Because the intent for D&D is for characters to get, is to grow in power and to elevate and become heroic and then mythic. But yes. Call of Cthulhu is not about that. It's about ordinary people.
And also, your usual Call of Cthulhu character might be more skilled as they go through the game, right, but they're actually less robust.
Right, because their sanity is eroding.
Their sanity is eroding. They are in many ways a less effective character 7, 8, 15 sessions in than they were when they started.
Well, see, the problem was when we played the Gumshoe version and we played the Delta Green version, I was hoping, and he was running the Sandy rules wrong. I was hoping that my character would erode, but it never worked out, and I was disappointed.
And that's one of the things but that's to me, going to what you were saying about mechanical experiences, that's so much that core feel that you want to have in a Call of Cthulhu game. I am an ordinary person. I might be a skilled ordinary person.
And I'm over my head.
I'm over my head. And it's only going to get worse. And I don't know, I don't know if I'm genre wise, at what point does this stop being a Sherlock Holmes investigation or a film noir detective story or an Umberto Eco book quest adventure? And what point does it become totally screwed up cosmic horror and I need to be institutionalized?
Yeah, exactly.
but I know somewhere there's this very dangerous boundary that I'm going to cross at some point in the Cthulhu experience. And when you try to do that with a game that's all about increasing power, I don't think you get that experience.
The other thing I would say is I will go on record to say I almost always really do not like playing high fantasy. Like, there is no draw to me, except for Runequest is more high fantasy than D&D, and I want to play in that world.
Well, I was going to ask, what do you even define as high fantasy?
I would say, to me, high fantasy is the permeation of magic to the point where it's in everyday usage. Like, that to me is when everybody's doing magic. To me, the sweet spot normally is Conan, Sword and Sorcery, where magic it's rare. When you see it, it's bad, it's scary. But also the Glorantha, I think it's been so D&D, I don't think there's been a very logical implementation of magic. Like, the world would be completely different than what they're showing.
No, I agree.
But Glorantha, it's like, oh, there's a reason why it's the world's the way it is. The magic is there, and it's not necessarily magic's always fireballs. It's other things. It's just a part of life. And it's
Blessed Crops. Blessed Crops is you want to be a power gamer. You screw these damage causing games spells. I went Blessed Crops.
Exactly.
But the reason I asked that is that have you ever read? You probably read it a long time ago. Do you remember reading the Iliad? All those.
I've not read the Iliad, but I've read the Odyssey, and I love the Odyssey. The Iliad never appealed to me.
Okay. But in both the Odyssey and the Iliad, you have, at a certain point, Odysseus is both a hero and an ordinary guy that suffers. Yeah. And he also meets loads of gods, spirits, goes into the underworld. So there's a certain bit where it's a mortal dude who is quite fragile in a number of points, and at the same time there's an awful lot of magic in the Odyssey.
Yes, and I think the other thing about him, as heroic as he is, well, I'll say heroic, that's not the right word. This is what I was also telling somebody about to me, what a Bronze Age game is what is an ideal person? What is a good person? And if you look at Odysseus, he's not fighting with his sword. He is lying and tricking his way back home.
Crafty Odysseus. Yes.
Then at the end, then you start seeing the sword come out and the arrows flying, and he kills the suitors. But up until that point, it's just trickery and sneaking and lying, and
because these things, when he starts dealing with the magical world, he's a mortal.
Yeah,
he knows he can't. The Cyclops is going to kill him.
Yes,
if he try. How do I deal with that? Well, I have to outsmart it. And that's one of the things I like. And one of the things mechanically that RuneQuest reinforces, even though you've got, you can have all of these great magical abilities and be really skilled at sword, you're very quickly going to encounter things that you can't fight.
Like with Odysseus, was it Cherubus and what's the other one, the two-headed thing in the
Skila.
Skila? Yeah, it's like you're going to have to go through this, but you better figure out a way because you're not going to fight it.
Yeah, it's going to defeat you. If you try to, and RuneQuest is filled with things very early on that it doesn't matter how skilled and magically buff I am. If I'm going to try to do a, D&D players, yay, let's charge. Isn't this balanced? I'm going to die.
And that's the way I think 5th edition has trained people, is that, and probably since 3.5, is that everything is balanced.
Yeah.
Where you just kick down a door and whatever's on the other side is going to be balanced.
Greg used to tell me when you'd bring up balance. Greg said the only balance that matters in a role-playing game is do these things work for the setting? So setting balance, like
right.
is right. If this little group here, are they so powerful that they ought to have conquered everything?
Right.
Well, then there's something probably
Smog's
wrong.
not balanced.
Smog's not, but setting wise, Smog is balanced.
Right, but there's no Hobbit going to go kill him. It's like
no. He said if you want now game balance in that, well, this foe is appropriate for somebody of this skill rating. Greg's comment was go play chess.
Right, but the thing is there's more ways of defeating things than just directly head on. So saying Smog was defeated through trickery. Smeagol, I guess, would be more even, but through trickery. I mean, a lot of these things, Moria was just done through just running.
Yep. It's like... and that's important in your game system, that when you're doing design is always make sure that there's a way for the players to get to the goal, whatever the goal is.
Right.
That doesn't require them to have the dramatic boss fight at the end. They should be able to trick their way through it. That should be fine.
Yeah.
That and running away can be some of the most exciting adventures of all time.
Right.
Going, God, we stole that diamond, and then all the orcs came, and we just ran, and the DM forced us to make these dice rolls, and oh God, we just made it. We made it out. Well, did you guys defeat the orcs? No way, no way. But look at the diamond. Look at the diamond, man. And this is just a thing on game design to remember is that with role-playing games, we're in the theater of the imagination, the theater of the mind. You don't need to have the set piece skirmish be the chief way of having a climactic part of your session. Your that emotional climax can occur from running away. It can occur from clever trickery.
Yeah.
Keep your options open. Well, this has certainly been a nice rambling conversation.
It's a specialty. Yeah, there's no rails. Well, there are some rails, I guess. But I've never encountered them. Yeah, it's the thing is there is no set agenda. It's just a matter of conversation. And this podcast is simply an excuse for me to talk with cool people.
Well, I'm having a blast here. I was just realizing, man, I don't even know what started this thread, but boy.
It's just, the thing is too, every person I've interviewed, it's because it's all sorts of people and, a lot of times strangers, but I realize, as far as most of us, we're all friends. We just don't know it yet.
Oh, most of my most of my closest friends, I have met one way or another through gaming, through conventions, through working together on projects. Be it, Greg was a very, very good friend of mine. Um, I met my wife at a gaming convention in Germany.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm assuming she's German then?
She's German. Yeah, she's from Berlin. Actually just moved back to the States after 14 years in
So I
Berlin.
didn't want to assume because I've got a cousin who went to, he lives in Switzerland, but he married a Peruvian while in Switzerland. So you just don't know these things. I know another guy who met who did some art for my zine. He met his wife. He's from Spain, was in Japan, and she's from Taiwan. So it's like Taiwanese. So when you start, the world's so metropolitan, it's hard to assume.
Well, and what is it they say about never assume? It makes an
You
ass
out
out
of
of
you.
you and me. No, I mean, this is the wonderful thing about gaming as a hobby and as a business. I mean, I'm really lucky. I'm at Chaosium. I work with my best friends. Um, I've known Rick and Neil. Rick Meintz, who's the president, Neil Robinson, who's our financial officer, and Michael O'Brien, who's the head of marketing and community outreach. These are people that have been my friends for more than a quarter century. You know, it's a wonderful thing because when you're dealing with gamers, there's always a common point of reference. We've all got that secret handshake, that
Right. Well,
you
I
know
think the thing is for me, it's like at a convention, it's the only time I actually feel like I'm with my people. By my people, I mean, I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to say we're not outcasts. We're not, I don't want to even suggest that, but there's something different about us that when you're with each other, there's I think a certain level of acceptance and a certain level of, you can share things, it's not just the gaming, but it seems like there's a lot of other things that are in common as well.
well, to put this into Runequest terms, every gamer has gone through is an initiate of the cult of gaming. And it's a very broad ecumenical cult. But
Yeah.
there's a certain bit that we've all had as a gamer. We've all had that unique experience that we talked about before. We've created something collectively with a group of folk. We've done that interactive improvisational radio theater, and we've participated in this thing that that doesn't otherwise exist in many forms in the rest of our popular culture. And so we're all, we may come from totally different walks of life, different cultures, different ideologies, whatever, but we share a common initiatory experience that we've gained. And
I think also with the creatives, it seems like there's also more than just even that. There's something else different about us that
well,
we link well with each other. And it could be like people just have odd interest. We find those things interesting. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's various even other things about a person that we seem to mesh more and we're
oh
more
yeah,
comfortable talking about.
and it's one of the things I love about going to game conventions. I love, I was really that had been my first game hall this year because I'm much more familiar with European
Yeah.
conventions. The only American convention I normally go to is Gen Con, uh, and so Game Hole was my first smaller, although it was still huge by European standards. It was my first smaller US convention, and it was wonderful. People
Yes.
were friendly and they were happy, and there were all sorts of different games going on. There was a lot of D&D of, as far as I could tell, every edition. there was Runequest, there was Call of Cthulhu going on, there was Pathfinder. People were just having a great time, and everybody was just enjoying being amongst their tribe.
Yeah.
The gaming tribe.
Right.
And what's neat, you go to a European convention, you get the same experience. The only difference, the main difference is the food's better and the booze is usually better as well. and I have to say, with all due respect to the great city of Madison, Wisconsin, and what's the name of the convention center there?
Oh, the Alliance Energy Hall, or Legion
yes,
Energy Hall.
The Alliance Energy Hall Convention Center there. I have to say, going to a gaming convention in a castle is way cooler.
Yeah, and there's plenty of castles in Europe from what I've heard, so it's easy to do game in a castle, but here it's like it's not going to happen.
No, but if you ever get a chance, definitely go to some of the smaller, mid-sized European conventions on the continent, not England. England, most of them are in, like in America, they're in convention centers or at university halls or whatnot. But you go to these European conventions, and I was in one in Switzerland 2 years ago, and it was held in a castle outside of the city of Gruyere, where they make the cheese, which happens to be where the Giger Museum is. So you could see all of Giger's original alien art.
Oh, that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, that was one disturbed individual.
Yeah, but when you're up in the Swiss Alps, you're in a castle in the Swiss Alps with this, with Gruyere cheese everywhere, and because it's a European convention. Oh well, at 11 o'clock we must have the discotheque.
Oh my goodness.
And there's other differences there, but at the end of the day, they're all the same tribe.
Right.
So even if it's a different con experience, the most important part of it is the same.
Yeah, and I've interviewed some people from different countries, and I'm thinking, like, you're from Rio de Janeiro. Why would you be playing role playing games? Beautiful place in the earth, but it's the same circumstances. We're all the same. Italy, whether it's Spain, whether it's in Rio or whatever it may be, it's like we are still fundamentally playing the same games, doing the same things, and having the same experiences.
Absolutely.
I guess we're all just people. I guess when it comes down to, we're just people.
Well, there is one of the religions in Runequest is the lunar religion of the Red Goddess, and very controversial. But the slogan of that, one of the most important slogans of or teachings of the Red Goddess is, "We are all us."
Well, but maybe for her, it's probably trying to get to an us that we don't want to be part of.
Well, there is always that. There is always that, but there is an element of that,
Yeah.
that if you're a gamer, it doesn't matter
Yes.
where you are in the world. You are one of us.
Right. Yeah.
And so, well, this has been absolutely delightful. I would love to come back on the show at some point. I'm just realizing that the time has flown absolutely past what I expected, because it's been so delightful.
No, likewise. I've got some things to attend to today. Thank you for joining me. If you could just down, I'd got a question for you after. I'll shut off the recording, but
absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Yeah, I'll definitely have you back if you'll come on.
Thank you.
Hey,
and enjoy, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Stop the recording.